Hello, and welcome to what is the first edition of the Road Hub International podcast. With the podcast series, we'll be bringing you all the latest in discussion and debate, and that's right across the vertical lift space. Over the last week, the news cycle has been dominated by the devastating fires in Southern California. So for us, it's a stroke of good fortune that my guest in this edition is Stu Sprung. Stu stepped down as the Chief of Flight Operations at Cal Fire just a few weeks ago. So if there is anyone on the planet not directly involved with fighting the fires who would have an understanding of what's happening with flight operations, it's got to be Stu. So Stu, thanks for joining us today. It's much appreciated. I mean, when you look at something like this and something like on the scale, I mean, is that something, I mean, you've been in aerial firefighting quite a while, is there anything like that on this scale? Have you seen anything even approaching this before?
Well, I would say it's interesting because, well, the answer is no, obviously, out the gate. I think probably the only thing that made that type of impression, as far as the stunning and the shocking visuals would be, compared to probably 9/11, when we had to go and work out there, where you just show up and you're like, this is something I've never seen before, and I'll never forget, and I can only imagine for the crews on the ground and in the air, they felt the same way. All of us have seen far more scope of damage, in 2020, and we had 4 million acres in the state. And in 2021, we had 2 million acres, but so much devastation in a residential area. I think in LA, the last big one was in, I think, 93 with the 𝗵𝘃𝗃 fire. And I think they lost in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 homes. And I think this one's already up to 10,000. So it's staggering, the amount of damage, and how quickly it was done was the other thing I think that that is going to make it so unique from other similar situations.
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, it's a scale, you talk about the 450 houses in the 𝗵𝘃𝗃, it's a 10,000, it's an exponential difference, isn't it? I mean, when you're confronted with an event on this scale, I mean, where do you even begin?
Well, I think that the simple thing is you use what you have in the aviation wise, which is just what's in service at the time. And then you just never give up, right? And I think that's what we saw on day one with the aerial firefighting. And that's the thing, it's a fair thing. There was so much happening on the ground, I think everybody is aware of. Our conversation will kind of be focused on what happened in the air, but it was all in support of everything that was occurring on the ground. And that's really is our primary and only focus. For us, I feel sometimes it keeps it simple. What do? We essentially buy time for firefighters on the ground so they can actually be the ones to put the fires out. We don't put the fires out, we slow them down so the ground fires can put them out. Fire's not out until it's out, and we can't really do that from the air. The ground firefighters have to do that. So everything we do is in support of them. And then I always say, kind of tongue in cheek, that beyond that, I say cheap insurance. Maybe we could be positioned in the right place at the right time. If ground crews or civilians get in trouble, we can go and maybe mitigate that if we're in the right place at the right time. That's really our purpose. So that first day, the wind's 100 miles an hour. It's moving 5 football fields per minute. There is literally nothing you could do to properly prepare for something like that. And I won't even address on the ground, but certainly not in the air. The things that we have is we have operational limitations of the aircraft that provide us safe margins when we're operating. So that has to be maintained. And then the other thing is the effectiveness of what we're doing, right? If the air tankers are dropping retardant and it's blowing into the Pacific before it even hits the ground, then we're not being effective. And the risk we're taking is not being met with some sort of benefit that makes it worthwhile. That being said, the crews that first day, we're going to be the in-service crews. So the Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County Fire Department, the 2 scoopers that were in service, those were the aircraft that really went in there. And and policy wise, when we have a program, that we have to have safety measures in place for operations, right? So what do we do? Well, the aircraft has limitations out the gate, right? So you can't even take off if the wind at the airport is exceeding the aircraft operations, right? So we have that one in place. In the en route environment, we use about 30 knots, 30 miles an hour, so about 40 miles an hour, right? Just being just rough as a max, because we know that's we're starting to see less effectiveness. But the issue is that a lot of times in these environments, they're not in the flat terrain where there's a steady prediction of wind, right? You can get there, and the fire could be in a place that's in a valley or in a sheltered area where that wind's not being effective. So why would we restrict use, operations in that area if it's not being affected by the winds so we leave a lot to the judgment of the pilots. They're highly trained. It takes us, I'll just say, on our tanker pilot side, a couple years for those guys to finish that curriculum. Helicopter is a little bit different, but the same thing. They're provided with the training to have the expertise, and they actually come here. Most of our pilots come from the industry with an entire career of experience before they ever get in the aircraft. We don't teach pilot training. We teach the mission, and if needed, and need be, the aircraft. And so that's what we spend our time teaching, to provide them with the depth of knowledge to be able to make that decision. We have to trust them with that when they're in there. And that's what you really saw, not just with the helicopters, but with also the fixed wing. They were looking for areas where, even though the wind was blowing 100 miles an hour, that they could possibly go in and affect a little bit of benefit safely within their own margins, but also deliver it was all water the first day onto the fire to try to mitigate it, and try to get it something close to a house that is obviously going to go, that may have people inside.
So I mean, I was thinking about that, talking about day one with the scoopers and the rotary assets, and most, by definition, water dropping. What about the logistics of moving in the retardant into the area? And actually, no, let's back up a little bit. Normally at this time of year, I remember I was in Sacramento myself, end of February, beginning of March last year, for the aerial firefighting conference, and we went out to McClellan and had a look. And I mean, it was like a small Air Force, but everything's back for annuals and all that work being low season. Now, surely, how do you spin up from that mode to full on fighting mode in a matter of hours?
That's a great question. One thing I want to say before you said small Air Force, that was brought up because I did a presentation at Lockheed, and one of the questions they had is like, where do you guys? You have a lot of aircraft. Where do you fit in the world's Air Force? It's a good question. And so I went in and I searched until I figured it out, that we are about right in the middle, about the 50th percentile for Air Force sizes, internationally. And we're even with Portugal, which was funny because they were in the audience when when I was bringing this fact up, and they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
But so just a little side fact, but you're exactly right. Yeah, typically in the industry, not just with CAL FIRE and the agency aircraft, this is typically when we say our winter maintenance season. The other thing that happens, it's the time we always talk about the aircraft, but not always the crews, that the pilots are also in a kind of a stand down mode for a little bit because they need the rest, right? The fires seasons have gone from 6 to 9 months to year round. And typically before that, they were engaged that entire time. Well, now that they're engaged the entire year, so giving them a moment to refresh and reset, spend time with their families, is really important. So while the aircraft are getting maintained, in a sense, so are the crews, and giving them a chance to reset before we start training. Our training typically starts in January.
Mm-hmm.
And then in earnest over the next 4 months, in preparation for the next season. So we're kind of training already in that down season, but in a much at a much lower tempo at least probably for the students, not for the instructors. So
pull those chiefs away from the sand tables, and here's a really big sand table to play with.
oh yeah, 100%. I mean, at some level, everybody is still engaged, right?
Mhm.
They're either coming out of it or getting ready to get back into training or into it itself. We do have 2 bases in Southern California that are year-round bases, so they're available as well. And the other thing too is that the way that our maintenance is, not all of the aircraft come back in during winter maintenance on the fixed wing side, just so we can maintain them, but they're also there, just available, and they're not all out of service at the same time. Some haven't gone into maintenance yet. Some maintenance is complete, so there's aircraft in service there, a fair amount, over half at any given time. So in a situation like this with the Los Angeles fires, I always say that it was that time when the wind was just too high to effectively operate. That time was being well used to go out, not just to Cal Fire into the state and find out, okay, what pilots are available to come in, what aircraft can we spool up and get ready to be operational. And that time, that entire 24-hour period before that second kind of phase of operations the next day went into effect, when the winds died and you could actually have operations, those pilots had already been called in, the aircraft had been designated, signed order numbers, and were able to respond down there. Which, if anyone's watching, any of the ADSB, you saw S2s just slowly, pairs of S2s for the most part, making their way down to Southern California. Tanker 122, our first C-130, and helicopters. Actually, at one point, I even saw Huey going down there.
Oh, right,
okay, yeah. There, and I didn't know air rescue, Helco. I don't know what they was being used for. I didn't want to bother them, but everything was being considered as a resource because of the magnitude of what was going on.
I was going to say, just for a note for people with the UH-1 reference, Cal Fire is in the process of transitioning away from the UH-1, which was the workhorse of the rotary fleet for a number of years, to the Firehawk platform. And I noticed again when I was in McClellan back in March of last year, there was still a few UH-1s around, and I was putting the question saying, so what's happening to the UH-1s? And they're still doing their thing, as it said.
Yeah, and we could talk about that a little bit more too. Finishing the thought, we can't do what we do. Our fleet is very much initial attack oriented. The number of aircraft that are staffed out throughout the state at any given time, and the personnel dedicated to that, are measured by our ability to, essentially, we have a mandate to, and this is written in state code, is any new fire in state responsibility area, we have to respond within 20 minutes. In the air side, we add on that we try to keep 95% of those under 10 acres. So our whole force laydown in helicopters and fixed wing is to meet that mandate. So that covers the initial attack part of it in the region that it's in. When fires go above that 10 acres and become greater incidents and go into a second operational period, which is the next day, we require these partnerships with industry to be able to help us meet the need to mitigate those incidents. And so we have phenomenal relationships with them. They're absolutely part of the team and family. And in this case with Los Angeles, the same thing happened. They're doing the same thing. Their aircraft's out of service. Their pilots are probably, resetting somewhere. And the same time we had, I saw the same thing. The Type 1 heli tankers that were in service with us all fire season, last fire season, fighting day and night. Some of the night water droppers were now being engaged, flying the same path, with our own S2s and Hawks down to that area to be operational, not just helicopters, but also the fixed wing.
I mean, it is extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, just as you say, looking at the flight aware tracks, stuff like that.
Yeah,
phenomenal spool up.
The next day, when I was looking between the two fires, the Palisades and the Eaton fire, and this doesn't count the aircraft on the ground reloading, refueling, whatever. I counted 25 aircraft in the air on the next day between the two incidents.
Yeah, I mean it's extraordinary, extraordinary
Yeah.
build up. When you just the whole scale of the event. But I'm just thinking about some of the logistics. Thinking about how do you move adequate quantities of retardant from where it's stored to, or is a lot of it already stockpiled? You mentioned you already have you've got the two Southern California year-round bases. There's a lot of it already stockpiled at those facilities.
They have, there's retardant that is there, but there's agreements in place with the manufacturer already because everybody needs a plan for this, right? Because it does happen everywhere. You never know where the next fire is going to be. Every base is responsible to have a plan to have some replacement of retardant if it gets used or if they're anticipating it, right? So I would say in this case, Fox Field it's a fed tank for base was where most of the retardant was being reloaded out of. It's a big base. They probably had a good stockpile there. And they certainly, I would say, had semis full of retardant driving towards it, probably right along with those aircraft.
Mhm.
Even before, probably the night before, they were probably already driving. The company itself was probably driving retardant down to that base, knowing that that would be the primary base of reload for especially the larger aircraft. But helicopters continue to use water. I think the water helicopters are the scoopers, and they can use retardant. But sometimes when there's so much aircraft and there's so much going on, keeping some simplicity in the operation as far
Mhm.
as not overcomplicating it with some helicopters driving retardant, some are doing water. It's easier, especially for the aerial supervisor's, position who is listening to six radios, talking to the ground IC, managing the airspace, trying not to make the plan too fancy sometimes is more effective.
Sure, and I guess it's also, playing to the strength of the asset. If you think about the quantities involved, if you're laying down a retardant line, you need consistency and length of
Yeah.
line, and that comes from those larger, fixed wing assets. Whereas, the heli assets are way better in the direct attack mode of, given the maneuverability and all those things. I guess it's that element too, play to the strengths.
Absolutely. You kind of have to commit to direct or indirect in the area that you're working in and then leave it at that. You can do it concurrently, and it happens, you can, and that's the dance of the aerial supervisor holding out the aircraft, letting the helicopters come in, hit a couple soft spots, come back, keeping them off the line because you don't want to dilute the retardant line in any way, or break it because then it defeats the purpose of the whole thing. So it is a very delicate dance, and I speak very highly of our aerial supervisors because they have so much responsibility, and their awareness has to be constantly at peak for everything, and they do a tremendous job.
Yeah, because I mean, effectively they're playing sort of, kind of a high speed, three-dimensional chess
It is.
against a player who doesn't know the rules and makes them
Yeah.
up as it goes along, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It seems kind of, I don't know, a little bit, maybe a little bit callous while the fires are still burning to talk about where does this, where do we go in the future? What do we think about? What are the kind of challenges? Obviously there'll be lessons learned and people will debrief and say, well, this worked great and that maybe not so much.
Yeah.
And we can tweak and analyze all that stuff. And that's for the debrief in the coming weeks and
Yeah.
months. But just thinking in the wider sense, what if you had a shopping list of things you'd have liked to see as things change, where the seasons have got longer, assets can't be shifted from one part of the globe to the other. Stuff would you say, oh yeah, here's my shopping list of things we should think about doing?
Yeah, I would say for this incident in particular, one of the quotes that I thought nailed it the most is that, in an article I read, is that you could have had a fire truck in every single driveway and it wouldn't have made a difference. And I think that's an important highlight to hear because there is literally nothing I think that we could have done. Anything that could have been done would have had to been some sort of something to mitigate in advance with the that even then it may not have made a difference with the vegetation. But I don't think once that spark was laid, I've had seen some videos of what was reported to be kind of the initial of that fire, because it did happen in the day, which a lot of times these happen at night. So, but once that took a foothold, and then there was like literally nothing that could be done. I'm just speaking to this incident, but I think also that what this incident does and what it has done, from what I've seen, is that it has brought the issue to the foreground. I think a lot of places around the world are going, that could happen to us.
Mhm.
We've talked about this many times. We're not prepared, we're not funded, we don't have a plan. And what happens is day to day, from my experience, day to day operations end up slowly kind of eroding that urgency, and it becomes we're back to our normal selves. And I think that's just natural. It's human nature. This is how we are, right? So what are some of the things, I think what you're referring to are some of the things that I'm interested in,
Mhm.
that I carve out time, especially in my previous job, for trying to move forward. How do we adjust to the new normal? How do we right size to the new normal? And I think that's really the stuff. I think there's times we could take advantage of, and there's resources we could improve on possibly. I think with that, I just look at supply and demand. When it's going down, what are the hardest resources to get? The hardest resources are large air tankers.
Mhm.
So type 1 large air tankers, so 3,000 gallons and above. And type 1 heli tankers, basically in the same realm, 2,000 above. And then adequate aerial supervision is the other piece that has to go with it. I think the operational period of the night is something that obviously most people are paying attention to, that we really committed to being involved in. We initially did it with our own program with our Hawks, and once we started getting, we're still learning, but we're starting to be comfortable with the idea. We realized that was an effective tool, but it wasn't quite enough to impact the actual need, especially at night. So engaging the type 1 heli tankers, night dropping under NVG was the other part. So anything we could do to promote those pieces of the puzzle: large air tankers, type 1 heli tankers, effective available aerial supervision day and night. All these things are currently globally in short supply. So whatever we can do to further those and make those more of a resource would be good. I also think that everything is about time and space, right? If you're trying to solve a global issue versus just your state or just your country, or you're looking at it from a big issue, the helicopters can't get around as fast as the jets, right? So how is there's not really currently a process in place to move those aircraft around efficiently to make them help when they're needed. So I think some sort of large, incorporating some sort of large cargo aircraft, a C5, something like that, or some C5s to incorporate in this. So if something happens, that those aircraft can be loaded on. This is a little outside of my realm, but as far
Yeah.
as like
Why not?
loading aircraft into other aircraft and putting them back in service, I'm not making this guy more off, but I think that would be a piece of it too, that would open up this capability to the rest of the world. So if something like this weren't to happen in a place where all the helicopters can fly to, like they did in Los Angeles, then we could still, within 48 hours, provide some assets that could help mitigate those issues.
Or indeed shift them, reasonably quickly. I remember, again, I've said it several times, but going back to last March, and at the time I was at the conference in Sacramento, there was a wildfire broken out in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I think it eventually got to like a million acres or something ridiculous like that. Helicopters are great, but airspeed is not one of the advantages. So
Yeah.
even positioning from assets from California or wherever to Texas is
Yeah.
that's a logistic nightmare in terms of
It
staging.
is.
equipment and everything like that. So
Yeah.
I guess it's all part of that bigger matrix. And as you already just said, that we're sitting here, every sector of certainly the helicopter industry and the
Yeah.
fixed wing too. Go try and find a helicopter right now. Go try
Yeah.
if you go down to Lockheed Martin or Sikorsky rather, and say, can I have a Firehawk? They're going to say, sure, put down your money, and we'll see you in about 4 years.
Yeah, and I think that it behooves us as an industry to start looking to, like I said, I think in the Hawk itself, it's a very effective tool. And what's good about the Hawk, it's a great multi-purpose, a Swiss Army knife of the fire service. You could do air rescue, crew transport, also water dropping, a variety of things, which makes it a very, very effective and useful platform for any agency or operator. If you're going pure firefighting, water dropping, the larger aircraft, or you're maybe going to get more bang for your buck. And especially if you're looking at some sort of like more of a global resource type thing, I think looking bigger to some aircraft that maybe aren't even quite being used yet. Right now the Chinook has been very effective. I'm a big supporter of the Chinook, but also those as in surplus are very difficult to get.
Sure.
So what else is out there that 𝗂𝗽𝗱𝗁𝘂 has the same capacity, that may be readily available in surplus, that has good sparing, right? That's the other piece. You can't just pull an aircraft out and that requires so much maintenance and not have adequate spares to keep it running, for as long as you're going to operate it. So all these things have to be considered and figured. I really think that like the Chinook and the Type 1 helitanker, as far as that platform, has really been the game changer here. The large air tankers are good because they have long legs, they can move fast with large payloads, right? The helicopters, how we're going to move into the night. The large Type 1 multi-engine helicopters are going to be the way that we can move into the night. I don't know if I'll still be around when I would think that flying a fixed wing aircraft, low level, dropping retardant at night, manned especially, would be a safe thing. So having that kind of mindset, it's helicopters that are going to do that. And you can get with some of these helicopters, large air tanker type capacity in a helicopter. You can go low level, slow, under goggles, not under goggles, day and night. You could drop retardant, you could drop water, you could build line just like a large air tanker at night safely in a helicopter. And I really think that's a huge piece of our industry that you'll see us working on. I think the autonomous space will be a part of that in our future as well. And I'm excited to kind of see what's going on with that as well.
Great stuff. I mean, we could talk all night. I'm sure about
Yeah.
all the elements and push-pull. I wanted to talk about using UAVs as a monitoring system with, hawks on QR, quick reaction alert and all that kind of stuff. But sadly, time is our enemy. And so, but Stu, really appreciate you making the time to sit down with me and have a chat about this subject. It's been fascinating. Really appreciate the time. That has been the first episode of the RotorHub International podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks' time when we'll be talking about another issue facing the industry and trying to unpick the threads.